welcome everyone to this panel discussion. Today, we will be discussing the BBC HardTalk interview between its host Stephen Sakour and the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan. The interview took place on August 14th of this year. I am Kevork Tanielian, your host for today, joining in from Toronto, Canada. And this discussion is organized by the Canada's Move. The HardTalk interview, which focused on the ongoing conflict between Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh on one side and Azerbaijan on the other, sparked an outcry from Armenians all around the world. Stephen Sakour's questions and comments were very hostile and ridden with anti-Armenian propaganda.
What we saw in mid-July was Armenian forces shelling villages across the line of conflict. Your policies do not appear to be designed to achieve peace. You clearly are not a peacemaker. Take responsibility and apologize for those abuses and crimes committed by Armenia's forces. It's quite simple, yes or no. Clearly, you're not going to say sorry.
As we know, mass media is often used as a propaganda machine by nations and special interest groups. For decades, a false narrative has been perpetuated in mainstream and social media about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. We will use the BBC interview to discuss how the media treats Armenian issues and the geopolitics relevant to the Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Today, we welcome our three distinguished panelists: Jirair Tutunjian, joining in from Toronto, Canada, David Davidian from Yerevan, Armenia, and David Boyajian, tuning in from Boston, Massachusetts. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for being here today. Before we discuss the BBC interview and the motivation behind the anti-Armenian agenda in the news, we must first understand the background of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. David Davidian, please give us a short historic background on the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and what role did Stalin play in the 1920s when Karabakh was illegally gifted to Azerbaijan?
What seemed to be like a brutal Bolshevik revolution, 1917 and the like. Yes, it was. It was brutal and the like. However, as with all revolutions, they have to be accepted by the world at large, one way or the other. And there was two issues. One was the regional power at the time, and the local regional power was basically Ataturk's Turkey, and the world power at the time was Great Britain. So what was happening is Ataturk looked like he was going to be some kind of anti-imperialist revolutionary, which is what the Bolsheviks also claimed at the same time. So what happened was there were quid pro quos going back and forth. It's either going to be land or people, one way or the other. Turkey also needed some kind of recognition, and the Bolsheviks definitely needed recognition. So one way to generate that or to solve that problem is to give away stuff that doesn't belong to you in the first place. So what do we have? We have Stalin, who says, okay, look, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll sit down with the Turks and the local representatives, Georgians, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, and we'll discuss what we're going to do about lands that were in dispute. Nagorno-Karabakh, being about 90% Armenian, it was granted jurisdiction by Azerbaijan, and that was in Turkey's favor. It was also in Great Britain's favor at the same time, because what you have a piece of land that it's not Muslim, but it's ruled by Muslims. So Stalin came out looking a little bit better at the expense of many peoples, mainly the Armenians. Well, in 1920, not too much later than when Artsakh, or at the time Nagorno-Karabakh, was presided over by Azerbaijan, the Armenian section of Shushi, which was the capital at the time, was destroyed and tens of thousands of Armenians were slaughtered. Okay, we're going to skip about 50 years, and the situation in Nakhichevan is also relevant to a certain extent, because Nakhichevan's population dropped off from just under 50% after World War II to about 5% in 1990. Now, the Azerbaijanis didn't force the Armenians out. They just created conditions that was conducive for them to leave and be replaced by Azerbaijanis. Now, that same plan was put in place by Heydar Aliyev in the 1970s and 1980s. Now, periodically, the Soviet Armenians would petition Moscow for Artsakh to be put under Armenian jurisdiction, but there was no success. But at that time, the time that these petitions were happening, Heydar Aliyev had another plan, and that plan was to increase the importance or jurisdiction of Azerbaijan from Nagorno-Karabakh through Zangezur in Armenia, which was populated by a non-trivial number of Azerbaijanis into Nakhichevan. And what Aliyev was able to do was to persuade a lot of Armenians, not personally, but created the conditions for Artsakh to move from something like 90% Armenian to about 70-something% Armenian. And most of those were the best and brightest, and they ended up in Baku. Okay. Heydar Aliyev's plans went, they got ruined as the Soviet Union fell apart. As the Soviet Union fell apart, the Armenians were demanding that Karabakh be placed under Armenian jurisdiction. And basically what happened is there were pogroms, fighting broke out. There were gigantic protests in Yerevan, protests in Azerbaijan. There were pogroms of Armenians in Azerbaijan. Basically, all that was left of the about 350 to 400,000 Armenians under Soviet Azerbaijani jurisdiction were in Artsakh, and they fought the Azerbaijani army, and they won sovereignty over that land. In 1994, there was a ceasefire. May of '94, there was a ceasefire, and that ceasefire is basically still in place, even though there's battles every once in a while. So basically, Armenians corrected the historical injustice by themselves that was handed to them.
Most journalists, Western journalists, reporting or commenting on the issue, start the story with Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh declaring independence. That's their starting point. But this is, of course, wrong. The story starts when Stalin gave Artsakh and Nakhichevan to Baku and did so illegally. This is where the story begins, especially when you consider that 80 to 90% of the population of Artsakh was Armenian at the time. This illegal act is ignored by the West. They start the story with these separatists, Armenian separatists, breaking away from Azerbaijan. Now, there are other things behind this outlook. As United Nations has told Armenia or Artsakh that the land belongs to Azerbaijan, the issue here is the conflict between the concept of territorial integrity, that is a state's right to its land, not to be taken away from it, versus self-determination, which is the Armenian point of view, that the people of Artsakh, who were forcibly given, their land was given to Azerbaijan, demanded and liberated their land. This is self-determination. Now, most states, if not all states, support the territorial integrity concept because that is in their interest. And many states have domestic issues with separatists, with ethnic groups. For example, Spain is the best example. There's Basque people, and there's Catalans who want to separate. France has Corsica, and other countries, many countries, India, Pakistan, you name China, they all have, Canada has the Quebec issue. So all these countries automatically support territorial integrity, okay? Now, but they're not consistent. And a good example of that is, of course, what happened in Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia's territorial integrity was not respected by the West. They went and dismantled the state in the name of self-determination. So now we have about 6, 7 states, as a result of the breakup of Yugoslavia. So the West, which is telling us we should respect territorial integrity, is not consistent. They change the game according to their interests. So we are not obliged to respect what is a flexible point of view. In addition, what happened in 1920 is illegal. So this concept of territorial integrity of Azerbaijan is based on a theft, on an illegal act. So that's the second reason Armenians should not and cannot accept going back. Besides, it is a highly impractical thing. When Artsakh is returned, if Artsakh is returned or given, not returned, given to Azerbaijan, what will happen to the 150,000 Armenians living in Artsakh? Okay, what is going to happen to Armenians, 300,000, who had to flee from Azerbaijan? What's going to happen to the Azeris who fled Armenia? This, you just cannot go back to the situation as it was before the move for independence.
Jirair Tutunjian, what is the significance of the Artsakh Armenian majority vote for independence from Azerbaijan in the 90s as the Soviet Union collapsed?
The impact was huge, and the repercussions are still continuing. I will cite 10 repercussions, and there are more. To save time, I'll just stick to 10. Number one, Artsakh became independent, became a new republic. That's one. Number two, it raised our feelings of nationalism in Armenia and in the diaspora. We were winners. This independence declaration speeded up Soviet Union's disintegration. To go overseas or abroad, it brought Israel closer to Azerbaijan. It opened the door for them. It also brought Turkey and Azerbaijan together, closer. It also revealed that Russia continued or continues to play games with Armenians and Azeris. It resulted in the blockade of Armenia, continued blockade. It also accelerated immigration from Armenia. On the positive side, for the first time in a long time, we were the winners. You look at our history, we kept losing land, we kept losing wars, Kars, Artahan, Nakhichevan, so on and so forth. For the first time in a long while, we turned the scenario and we were the winners. This was a huge psychological lift to Armenians everywhere. Well, of course, it resulted in this continuous war. That's about it. But I can cite more. But I think these are, in my opinion, the major repercussions.
David Boyajian, what is Russia's current view on Artsakh?
Well, Russia knows Artsakh is very important to Armenia, of course, but though Russia has a mutual defense treaty with Armenia itself, there is no such treaty between Russia and Artsakh. Russia does not even recognize Artsakh as an independent state, independent republic. Even Armenia doesn't, for that matter. Russia's main concern is Armenia proper, because Armenia blocks NATO penetration, complete NATO penetration of the Caucasus. Armenia is Russia's only ally in the Caucasus, so that makes it very important. It's a foothold that Russia has. Again, Russia does not have a treaty with Artsakh. I sort of see Artsakh as somewhat marginal, therefore, to Russian interests. I think that because it's sort of off to the side, the Artsakh issue to Russia. I'm not sure it cares which way it goes, whether it stays Armenian or comes under Azerbaijani rule again. I'm just not sure about that. By the mutual defense treaty between Russia and Armenia, Russia is not obligated to come to Artsakh's defense. However, it's kind of troubling that Azerbaijan has attacked Armenia proper several times, and yet it does not appear that Russia has come to Armenia's defense there, therefore, which is a little strange. I don't know what is in the mutual defense treaty between Russia and Armenia. It may be that there is something in there that says that if a conflict breaks out between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but Russia deems the cause to have been the Artsakh issue, then Russia is not obligated to come to Armenia's defense. On the other hand, maybe Russia is helping Armenia behind the scenes. I know during the July war, reportedly Russia sent more military supplies to Armenia. So it's kind of difficult to tell what's in Russia's mind. I do think, though, that just in general these days, because Putin does not particularly care for democracy in Armenia and does not care for Pashinyan reaching out to the West to balance Armenia's foreign policy, that this has gotten Russia kind of nervous, and so it has not been. I think it's trying to induce a certain anxiety into Armenia as to whether Russia would necessarily come to its defense in the event of major hostilities. For example, I don't see Russia talking too much, just slightly about Turkish moves, the Turkish militarization of the Azerbaijani region of Nakhichevan. Armenia and Russia, though, really need each other, and we can perhaps talk about that later. But that is one of the main points I want to get across.
Are Armenians still under genocidal threat by Turkey and Azerbaijan? Any of the participants may discuss.
Yes, as a matter of fact, as soon as the world blinks, Armenia will be under threat. I mean, as it is, I think it was about 3 weeks ago, Erdogan in a speech, maybe about a month ago, but I think it was about 3 weeks ago, in a speech said that Turkey will follow in its ancestors' path and continue on with what they were doing, except this time in the Caucasus. He didn't say genocide, but everyone understood what that meant. In fact, even the former mayor of Baku in 2005 made a statement that said, in fact, in front of Germans, made a statement that said, our goal is the elimination of the Armenians. And you Germans should understand that, having eliminated the Jews. So it's one thing making these statements. It's another thing, those statements coming to pass or coming true, depending on the situation in the world. You know, if Russia blinks, if the U.S. blink, well, the U.S. has been blinking for the past 3 years, but if Russia blinks, and it's a very interesting setup. You know, Russia and Turkey have fought many wars over the past 200 years. You know, and there could be one more, except the outcome could be much worse this time. You know, Russia's a nuclear power. Turkey isn't. And we have to remember that, you know, Armenian borders with Turkey are protected by Russian soldiers. Something happens to a Russian soldier, the next thing you'll hear about is that, you know, the Treaty of Kars has to be revisited, which means the lands that were in, you know, the farthest northeast of Turkey, it may be up for grabs now. So it's a very precarious situation. David Boyajian brought up some of that. Some things we don't know, some things we just, you know, we just have to do our best and analyze.
Jirair, would you like to add?
If there is a genocide, it will not be Azerbaijan's doing, because they don't have the power to do it, although they want to do it. Now, in Turkey's case, I slightly disagree with David Davidian, because if Turkey attacks Armenia, I believe Russia would stop the Turkish army, and that would be a huge war. The result might be devastation of Armenia. It would be a huge war in Armenia, but that would not be a genocide. In my mind, genocide is an army comes in and kills everyone or drives everyone out. Well, that's not going to happen because Russia wouldn't let it, and the world wouldn't let it. It's not 1915. You just don't go to a country and kill everyone and then occupy it. It cannot be done. Now, it's interesting that a few days ago, a Russian analyst, a senior Russian analyst, said that Turkey would not attack Armenia because, not because of Russia, but because it has its hands full with conflicts elsewhere and it's spread thin. And this is not a comfortable thing to hear, that Russia isn't the reason. But this is what an analyst is saying. But what I understand from him is that had Turkey not been overstretched, it might attempt. And if it would attempt, that would mean it is not afraid of Russia, or it has an agreement with Russia to come to some kind of what shall I say? Well, an agreement where Turkey would have, Armenia will become a sphere of influence of Turkey. Okay, but I don't think there's going to be a genocide. It's not Cambodia. It's not Rwanda. It's a very important part of the world. It's where the East and the West meet. You just don't kill 3 million people. You can't.
All they have to do is kill a 250,000 and the rest will just flee.
Yeah.
And it's the same work is done.
I think Armenia is definitely under genocidal threat and has been for a long time, certainly at least since 1991 independence. You know, in 1993, Turkey was about to invade Armenia. There was a coup planned against Russian Premier Boris Yeltsin in 1993. And one of the leaders of that coup was Ruslan Khaspolatov, a Chechen who was Speaker of the Russian Parliament, he had made an agreement with Turkey that if the coup plotters had overthrown Yeltsin, that Turkey would get the green light to invade Armenia. Russia would not stand in its way. So we don't really know what's going to happen in the future with Russia. The demographic situation in Russia, as I understand it, is the Russian ethnic group is diminishing relative to other groups. Russia has its hands full in the Northern Caucasus. We just don't know what's going to happen. So, yes, we can sort of count on Russia helping to defend Armenia now, but we don't know what's going to happen down the road. The last thing I'd like to say is that the world, including too many Armenians, have seen 1915, the genocide, mainly as something to be remembered, commemorated, and so forth. No, it goes beyond that. The genocide remains a threat now. The genocide of 1915 and 1923 is still a here and now issue. And we need to really emphasize this more. Armenia does, particularly. You know, in the United States and Europe, they pass resolutions about the Armenian genocide, but they don't seem to recognize, or if they do, they don't talk about it, the genocidal threat that remains today. And that needs to change. We need to talk about it, and we need to get them to talk about it and be aware of it.
Now let's discuss the relationship between Armenia and Russia, and Armenia and the Western countries, primarily those in NATO and the European Union. What role do these relationships play in the conflict between Armenians and Azerbaijan?
I would like to start by talking about our history with Russia. More than 300 years ago, we started sending representatives requesting the Tsars to send their armies to liberate Armenia. Russians took their time. They were busy in Europe fighting the Turks and others. Finally the army showed up in 1821, and it had lots of Armenians in the Russian army. And they liberated Armenia. They drove out the Turks and the Persians. Of course, Armenians thought that this would mean that we'd have an independent country, but they were soon disappointed when they discovered that Imperial Russia was like Turkey light, not much difference. And the Tsar, Nicholas II, considered Armenia an oblast of Russia, sort of like a colony. From then until 1917, imperial rule, Tsarist rule, there were 4 Tsars. Out of the 4, 3 were openly hostile to Armenians. There's Nicholas I, Alexander III, and Nicholas II. Alexander II was relatively amiable and pro-Armenian, but he was assassinated. So 1917, we know what happened. The Bolsheviks came eventually, and for the next 70 years, we continued to be sort of a colony of Russia. And since then, we've had 1, 2, 3, 4 presidents or prime ministers, and Russia hasn't changed its attitude. It still considers us sort of a colony, their sphere of influence. And remember that in 1896, when the massacres were taking place in Turkey, their foreign minister, Russia's foreign minister, his name is Alexei Lebanov-Rostovsky, said that Russia is interested in Armenia, not in Armenians. They're interested in the real estate, not the people. To them, Armenians were troublemakers. And this opinion was shared by other senior officers. In 1909, when the Adana massacre took place, 3,000 Armenians were killed by the Turks. That same year, Nicholas II was on his way going to Rome, and he wanted to stop in Istanbul for a friendly chat with the Sultan. Okay, and then in 1916, Yudenich, who was in charge of the Russian army in that area, they dismantled the Armenian volunteer force, and then he wanted to populate Armenia with Russians and Cossacks. In 1945-46, when Armenia was the second in loss per capita as a result of the Second World War, its population declined, of course. Because of population decline, Stalin wanted to reduce us to an autonomous republic, former republic, and then we fought and we were able to stop it. But this has been the Russian attitude towards us. Now, it is very important. Russia is the most important country to us. So managing that relation is crucial. We all understand. Unfortunately, Russians, no matter whether Tsarist, communist, or the current, they want to decide our foreign policy and the domestic policy and interfere because, what's his name? Putin is a friend with Kocharyan, or was a friend. He interferes in the judicial system of Armenia and defends a corrupt president who shared his weakness for big game hunting. And he's been, relations with Pashinyan are frigid. I don't know where we're going, but this is a crucial challenge Armenia faces. How do we change Russia's policy towards us? And I think people of Armenia, or statesmen, scholars, politicians, are better qualified than I in finding a new formula for our relationship with Russia. But it cannot continue like this. It's a one-sided relationship. And many Armenians don't appreciate that although Russia is a dominant partner in the relationship, as David said, Russia needs us also. We, as Armenians, seem to minimize our importance to Russia. Okay, if we go, Erdogan, Azerbaijan, will realize their dream of Istanbul to the China border, Turkic land. Okay, and Russia would be deprived of land connection with Iran and the Gulf. Right, already Russia is facing huge challenges in the West with NATO. In the East, China is sort of one day friendly, one day not. So what we have here is the South. The South is Armenia. Armenia goes, another door sort of slams in the face of Russia. So they need us. The other thing is just a cultural thing. Russians should be reminded that for 300 years, we have contributed tremendously to Russian heritage, to Russian culture, to Russian defense. We have been there for them all the time. Yet they are so insensitive to our needs. A couple of years ago, you remember that Putin introduced an immigration program, open immigration, encouraging Armenians and others to move to Russia. Perhaps because of what David Davidian said, or David Boyajian also said, about the fact that Russians are decreasing in percentage in the federation. He wanted to sort of people who have more affinity with Russians, such as Armenians, to come and increase the number of the Russian presence in Russia. So this was a huge blow to Armenia because a lot of people left. There was a brain drain. Already we are suffering from immigration, and this open door policy hurt us. It's still hurting us. Yet Putin doesn't care. Okay, he should think that a strong Armenia, in every way, is to the benefit of Russia. He doesn't seem to notice this.
If I could break in, here's how I see the general picture. NATO has already gobbled up several Eastern European countries, and Russia feels even more threatened than it did before. Now, NATO and the EU are trying to penetrate the Caucasus all the way up to the Caspian Sea. This is a grave threat to Russia, and this is why Russia needs Armenia, because although the Caucasus is open somewhat now through Georgia, pipelines from Baku through Georgia, then into Turkey, and now going into Europe, still the Caucasus is not completely open to the West because Armenia is a Russian ally. If NATO penetrates to the Caspian Sea and perhaps beyond, that's a true existential threat to Russia. And of course, we're talking about pan-Turkism too. Turkey, Azerbaijan, and then the countries in Central Asia, the Turkic countries there. And Russia is well aware of the threat there. So Russia does need Armenia. It's not a good situation for Armenians to psychologically believe that they are dependent on Russia or completely dependent. Yes, to a certain extent, Armenia needs Russia. There's no doubt about that. But Armenians should also see it the other way around. And to take up on what Jirair said, and I think we've discussed this privately at some point in the past, the Russian people need to be told that Armenia is important and why it's important. I think the Russian leaders definitely know this. Do the Russian people? Because the polls I've seen over the years say that the Russian people do not necessarily have that high a regard for Armenians. Well, they must be told about Armenia's importance. This is very important, and I think Russian Armenians, of whom there are a considerable number, that should be their task.
If I could just chime in here for a second. The Armenians in Russia, there are influential Armenians in Russia. Many things that they do, we sometimes don't hear about. Some of the reason is because if there's reporting on it, it's either slanted and or in Russian, or it's just not reported on. The other issue is what the average Russian sees for an Armenian. Now, the average Russian, let's say the average Russian in Moscow or the larger cities, they see Armenians as something like manual labor. They sell fruit, they're truck drivers and the like. They also see Azerbaijanis and almost everyone from the Caucasus. In fact, Russians tend to, they are sometimes rather racist. Sometimes they refer to, anyone from the Caucasus as, our black brothers, because we have more sun here than in Moscow. And as a result, the last interface that you have with an Armenian could have been at a fruit stand and something bad happened. Now, if you look at the intellectual class in Russia, you would actually be shocked. There's a lot of Armenians involved. There's a very, very sharp class of Russian experts in many, many areas. And there are Armenians that participate at that level. Maybe it's only 5% of the people. So you get the 95% that say, these are just black fruit sellers or something like this. So, we have to be careful just because we don't hear something that things aren't happening. But I understand your point, David.
Yeah, I would just like to add something. And this is a whole different subject, but we should at least mention it. Russia is used to imperialist games and balancing between ethnic groups, both within Russia and in the past within the Tsarist and Soviet empires. So it's trying to balance now between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Russia is also trying to bring NATO member Turkey somewhat into its fold and thus away from the West. So it's trying to sort of co-opt Turkey in a sense. Obviously, this makes Armenians nervous. They don't know, Armenia does not know where this is going to head because Turkey has much greater weight than Armenia in terms of population, economy, military, and so forth. And let me just add something that's kind of in the background, and we all know about it, but Armenia cannot at the present time seek security within the Western security structure, NATO and the EU. And the reason for this is that Turkey has much more weight. Turkey has much more weight within NATO than Armenia would have. And the second thing is that the Western powers have never really restrained Turkey very much. I mean, look at what Turkey is doing now in Cyprus, in the Aegean, in Libya, and so forth. So even if Armenia, in the unlikely happenstance, joined NATO, and Turkey made an aggressive move or invaded Armenia, would NATO hold it back? You know, that's very much in question. So it isn't that that Armenia, which has excellent relations with the West, of course, does not somehow like the West. For security reasons, it cannot become part of Western security structures because the West does not have a vital interest in stopping Turkey from penetrating the Caucasus. In fact, NATO wants to penetrate the Caucasus. Russia does not want NATO and Turkey to penetrate the Caucasus, and therefore Russia and Armenia have something in common there.
Now, these next few months may prove pretty interesting because, Turkey is probably doing, Turkey traditionally has done, first of all, it does whatever's in its interest, and it uses opportunities that other countries don't. It basically, the Antalya region, the Sanjak of Alexandretta, that was basically given to the Turks. So the Turks wouldn't side with Nazi Germany during World War II. So they stayed partially neutral. They had, pretty heavy, they had pretty heavy Nazi, leanings, but fine. 1938, Turkey expands. They took the initiative in Cyprus. 40% of Cyprus is occupied. Look at northern Syria. Now, every one of those events had its wider international power supporters. So that's what's happening. I believe that's what's happening now. It's probably beyond it's beyond us right now in this conversation to get into that, but it is very, very complex. And it's sort of difficult to say, oh, it's this, it's that, because this or that depends on previous assumptions as we go along. Right now, it's very interesting right now that Azerbaijan is cranking up the anti-Russian rhetoric right now. Oh, Armenia got supplied with weapons during the war. Well, so did Azerbaijan. In fact, there were war games sponsored by Turkey on Azerbaijani soil. If that isn't a piece of aggression, I'm not really sure what it is. Right on Armenian borders, how many weapons did the Turks leave the Azerbaijanis? I bet hundreds of millions of dollars worth, if not more. But we're just guessing because we don't have the documents. So this is pretty complex. That's a very complex question. And the best we can do is just do our best at, do our best at just giving an opinion or our best hypotheses.
Another factor in this is Israel. Israel and Azerbaijan are allies. As David Davidian has pointed out in his articles and posts, this has meant that Jewish writers throughout the world have targeted Armenia. That is, the Jewish writers support Israel's alliance with Azerbaijan, and therefore speak against Azerbaijan's adversary, Armenia. So this has a large effect too. You see, back when Israel and Turkey were more friendly, and I think Israel is just waiting for the day when Erdogan is no longer there and things can get back to normal between Israel and Azerbaijan. The top levels of the American Jewish community, the organizations, were siding with Turkey, denying and diminishing the genocide and trying to stop Armenian genocide resolutions in the US Congress. Well, relations between Israel and Turkey have soured somewhat. So now, instead of working for Turkey, what these Jewish organizations and Israel are doing is working on behalf of Azerbaijan. So Israel's buddy, Turkey, is no more. Israel's buddy now is Azerbaijan, but now in both cases, Armenia and Armenians are the targets. So this, of course, Israel carries a lot of weight in US policy. So this is something to be borne in mind. And I think this should be talked about more in the Armenian press. I know my colleagues and you, Kevork, know it very well, but it should be better known.
Why should this conflict matter to countries outside of the region?
Well, let me talk about the Arab countries, not Europe. Arabs are split whether to support Erdogan and his Sultanate dreams, fantasies. And other Arabs are concerned about the arrival of the Ottoman Sultanate because that would mean encroachment on Arab lands, meaning Syria, Iraq, certainly. And now they are trying to penetrate northern Lebanon. They worked with Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and then their leader, the Muslim Brotherhood, was brought down, and that's why Turkey is anti the present Egyptian government. They are, of course, now in Libya and in the Gulf area. They are in Sudan, they are in Eritrea, and they even tried to spread their influence in Israel, in Jerusalem, but Israel stopped them. So the Arabs are becoming more and more concerned. So if Turkey gets, let's say, attacks Armenia or starts threatening, Arabs get concerned that where will this expansionism lead? Okay, and luckily Turkey or Erdogan is open about his ambitions. So that should, and any kind of conflict with Armenia, Arabs are sensitive to it because they say, are we the next? Okay, because if Turkey takes Armenia, it would become much stronger. So thinking Arabs are concerned, but at the same time, Erdogan is spending lots of money in Arab countries through religious channels, through cultural channels, and so on, to persuade Arabs that he means well. But any attack on Armenia would signal Arab countries that, they might be next.
Now, we would like to invite our panelists to take a 5-minute break.